Hello, Nina. Thanks for joining the call today. And for those of you watching, I hope you and your family are well during this COVID-19 lockdown period. Today, we're going to learn more about Nina's journey into eventually developing extended reality diversity initiative. And for those of you who don't know, Nina is an extended reality creative and consultant, a filmmaker, a curator, a speaker, and diversity advocate. I discovered her through her recent post on LinkedIn where she shared some interesting events regarding XR. And I wanted to know a bit more about XR. I don't know if I've been living under a rock, but I've heard of VR, AR, but I'd never heard of the XR being mentioned before. So I actually Googled this, thought, extended reality, what is this? So now I wanted to reach out to her to learn more about this. So here we are. So essentially, Nina, how are you doing, first of all? Hope you're okay during this COVID-19 period. Hope you've been settling in all right.
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I appreciate you reaching out to me, and I look forward to telling you guys more about extended realities. I think the first thing that I should say is that I think Extinction Rebellion kind of hijacked the XR
Right.
for kind of like VR, AR, MR. All of these different terms were really confusing, and especially as more headsets were coming out, they were kind of saying there was like a mixed reality headset when in reality it wasn't. So the marketing was really convoluted and it was very confusing for consumers to really understand it. So when I say XR, I mean VR, I mean AR, I mean MR, and it's all sort of under that umbrella.
Interesting, right? 'Cause I never heard of it until now. But yeah, like you said, the Extinction Rebellion has been stealing the light from you. But right, interesting. So initially, from looking at your background, your website, and everything, I was interested to find out that you started with a master's in filmmaking. So I wanted to know, you then eventually progressed into making short films and documentaries. So could you tell me a little bit about what spurred your passion to do filmmaking to start off with?
Sure. So I grew up in 9 different countries, and one of the things that I struggled with was trying to tell people what it was like in countries where, you'd see people on the streets dying. And it was really difficult to go from like a war zone area to like a more developed area, and that understanding just wasn't there. And so I thought, okay, I really love music, I really love theater, I really love like all of these things that are creative, and filmmaking seemed like um, the perfect format to go both into documentaries, into fiction. So it was like my way of trying to figure out, okay, I love all of these things, but I don't want to specialize in it. So I'd like to do one thing that can go across everything, and that's how I went into filmmaking. And I still make films on the side. It's still something that I enjoy and love doing. I can't turn off my storytelling personality, I suppose.
That's interesting because, yeah, with all the stuff you're doing with XR at the moment and you're doing filmmaking as well, I don't know how you find the time because, yeah, it sounds like you're juggling a lot of things in one go. But
Yeah, I don't know how I'm doing this actually, and I don't advise it for anybody. A documentary I'm working on now is a music documentary about Asma Hamzawi, which is a sort of character documentary about her as she's becoming a rising star in world music. And
Mhm.
so it's kind of following her journey I think I've been making this documentary for like 4 years now. So
Wow.
it's a long process. And then, in virtual reality, I'm making a film as well. So I'm not keeping it to one thing.
Interesting because, looking at your past documentaries as well, I noticed there was one that was very popular in the past. It was called In State of Transit. And that had a massive social impact as well. And for instance, in the Middle East, I was wondering what was your motivation to cover that particular subject in 2011 as well.
Sure. I think I'm the most proudest of my documentaries because they have a social impact. My father works with refugees. His job is to help get countries to give aid to refugees, and so he set up an emergency transit center. And so I worked alongside, I think it was Castle Rock and Saatchi, and it was a film that was supposed to showcase why an emergency transit center was required. So the whole idea is if you are in a location where you will, within a few hours, potentially be killed or assassinated, you need to get out of the country as quickly as possible. And so the transit centers are locations where it's kind of a buffer zone between a country that will take you as a refugee, give you asylum, and a place that will kind of be a temporary holding thing. So you won't get killed, you won't get assassinated, but you will kind of be in a buffer zone whilst you're waiting to hear if you can get asylum or not. And so it is called an emergency transit center for that purpose and for that reason. And the documentary was made to highlight why we need more centers around the world that can buffer this sort of time period between leaving the country and getting asylum.
Right. So, I mean, were you actually in on the action? I mean, seeing it firsthand, like in real time, in terms of everything? Because that sounds like you put yourself in a bit of harm's way. Like, was it quite risky? Did you find, or was it what was it like?
So I was more on the side of making sure that we got the right content and that we interviewed the refugees in the transit center. I didn't actually go to Syria or any of those locations. We actually
Okay.
managed to get the footage from someone who had sadly been shot and killed. So we asked permission to use that footage, and that was screened at the UN summit to showcase why we needed transit centers.
Yeah, just for a second there, it kind of sounded like a Louise Theroux moment where you're going right into the action there. I was like, whoa, whoa, that's very brave for a second.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
so
wanted to. I
yeah.
wasn't allowed.
Oh, right. Damn. Well, yeah, no, I've got to commend your bravery, in fact, and just the ability to actually get that kind of footage and actually hear other people's stories. I remember it reminded me of actually a charity event I went to. There was a Syrian refugee who traveled all the way different countries and then was smuggled into the back of a truck just to get into London. And hearing that story firsthand, it's crazy, just seeing it from their perspective. It's a completely different world. It's just a culture shock for a lot of people. So yeah, I've got to commend you on that, for covering that in the
I
past.
think what was crazy about that was there were filmmakers in the camp who were just like me, who were just covering everyday stories, and we actually had to cut things out of the documentary because it was so horrific, like mass murder graves and um, political footage that would
Yeah.
have created a lot of tension. Um, so it was sad to see, like, in other countries, that if you just do your job as a filmmaker, as a journalist, you cover information, you cover human stories, that someone would want to kill you for that. So that was quite impactful. And the other documentary as well, like that one was really interesting because that I think was very much of the how are women perceived online and how are they perceived offline, as well as like just discrimination. Like all of these things are just people judging you based
I
on
see.
yeah.
No, it's quite refreshing to see because we always get it from our own bubble of the UK in terms of what BBC tell us, or the Americans always hear it from the Western points of view, but you actually get the real raw journalism in there by actually exposing the truth of the situation and hearing their story rather than some tainted version, which I think is very commendable, and I like that for sure. And I think what you just mentioned was that documentary about gamer girls you were talking about
Yes,
in
exactly.
2012. Right, right, yeah, because and based on that, in fact, I wanted to know, in fact, what were the key insights you gained from it, and what ways do you see the gaming industry changing in the future? Because you're quite passionate about how it affected women in general.
Um, so I so I lived in Africa, so I didn't really play a lot of video games until I discovered the Xbox and I discovered Halo,
Right.
and I was really into this idea of collaborative experiences online and going on a journey together. And when I started playing video games, I did it because my boyfriend at the time was really into video games, and then I was like, actually, I'm really into video games. For like my 16th birthday party, I hosted a Halo Xbox party where like we had two Xboxes, and I invited all my friends to like play Halo, which was a lot of
Interesting.
people were like super confused by it, but I was like, this is so much fun, this is great. Um, and then when I started playing video games, it was like a PC. When I was like, okay, I need a proper computer to make films, but also coincidentally, the desktop or the laptop also works for playing video games. And so I really got into MMOs, and I was playing online multiplayer games for a really long time. And I joined a clan. I
Right.
joined a clan, and all of the people in the clan were men. There was only one girl who was in there, and she was on the American time zone, so we never played together. But I realized that when I mentioned to people that I played video games, or even when I met girls online, there was hostility from people, you know? And I think if I had continued playing video games, and if my parents had said, "Oh, yeah, just follow YouTube," my parents were like, "What are you doing with your time? Why you want to make Hollywood feature film movies? YouTube is nothing. It's going to be nothing." And I could have been like a huge, I think, gamer, and like I was, I think, one of the first ones to like properly start the YouTube channels, and I added memes to my videos, and I was there before Google bought YouTube. So I really understood how like you were interact when this was when YouTube was still an exciting platform, when you can like upload things, remix it, and just make
Sure.
it really exciting. But I was learning how to edit and how to make quick videos really quickly, by playing video games, by uploading them to YouTube, and that kind of gave me a lot of, I guess, experience in how to manage events online, how to manage people online, how to run a war campaign
Yeah.
online, with like lots of different teams. How do you work together? And I really enjoyed that collaboration. So I made Gamer Girls because one, I was doing my master's in filmmaking, and there was a documentary module, and people heard that I played video games, and they're like, "That's weird, that's strange. What is that world? I don't understand that world." And so I was like, okay, like maybe there's something here. And I think there was, and it went to a film festival afterwards, and I still get comments today, of hate.
Right.
And when I did play Xbox, I did get a lot of hate. I did get a lot of, I think, aggressive messages, threats, things where they're like, "I want to kill you," and stuff like that. And that, I think, is really translates to the virtual world right now, because we're moving to a world where, for example, Epic Games recently are saying like they want to create the future of the internet, the new internet that's built on a game engine rather than on the internet that we know today. So if we take cultures that exist in video games and we translate them into a virtual reality space, then we're
Mhm.
talking about real aggression and violence that's geared at individuals because they are anonymous, and we're bringing into a virtual space where that violence and aggression can continue. And therefore, I think a lot of people in enterprise, they might not have played video games as much as I have, and they don't really understand that mentality of especially younger generations, where they don't have accountability for their actions, and that persists back into virtual reality. So that's something that I'm really, really looking at, because I think people don't really understand presence in virtual reality and what it means when someone tries to put their hand on your face or on your avatar, and that's quite,
Mm.
that's quite jarring. Even if you're in a social VR location, just unlike in real life, you would want to keep like a few meters apart from that person. You've got a headset on, you're feeling that spatial distance between each other. And so when someone goes up to you with their avatar, that's, you back up because it's uncomfortable. So what is real in the real world translates to a virtual world. And if you bring in toxic online bullying, aggression, and you bring it into a space where there's no accountability,
Yeah.
we're talking some real danger here. So that's something, I'm looking at the moment.
That's interesting. Starting off from when you faced a bit of resistance, you mentioned about your parents being disapproving of the fact that you liked gaming and even the YouTube side. it right in the start when YouTube first came along, everybody just thought it was just kind of a thing everyone does for hobby and for their own interest outside of their career, but nobody realized you could make a career from this, and to see it just skyrocket in terms of popularity. And same with the gaming industry. In fact, there was a point, I think, similar to time YouTube was around, the gaming industry eventually overtook the film industry in terms of profit. And I think nobody foresaw that
The
happening.
gaming industry makes more money than the music and the film industry combined. It is
Yeah,
the
I
most
can imagine.
supportive force for the influencers and the people who create the games. It's a very supportive community, and people look down on it. But really, realistically, when you open your phone, when you're
Yeah,
on YouTube, are you playing a video game? You are. If you're playing card games, you're playing games. Like all of these things that people look down on, I think is really, really bad. And if we're looking at all of these online virtual conferences, they mimic the real world. But really, what we should be looking at, and this is what I keep going back to, and a lot of filmmakers who don't play video games have this problem, is go to video games. Go to video games, go to immersive theater. Look at the way that you interact with people. How can you create something that's more immersive, engaging, and interesting, rather than replicating the whole man in a suit and walking around in like a big conference hall. Like it can be a
yeah.
lot more interesting. It could be a lot more engaging. How are video games doing this? And they've been way ahead of the curve. Considering that it's now kind of like the lead for almost everything. Like I think the UK, the video game industry make up a huge percentage of its GDP.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I was very surprised, when you mentioned about the kind of online hate you were sort of experiencing too at the same time, and because it's like, well, from my perspective, I mean, I don't see a problem, obviously, with whoever chooses to play video games, and you're just literally gaming, and somehow you're getting you were saying death threats and things like that. I was just shocked to hear that as well. I'm really sorry you had to go through that, by the way, but
No,
I
I
just
mean
yeah,
this is what happens now. This was what
yeah,
happens today. I think it's a little safer with Minecraft and stuff like that, but you have to remember I was playing first person shooter games. So like
interesting.
there's already like aggression in that game where it's like, "Oh, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to," and it's kind of, and like the moment you come online, and I mentioned this in a documentary, your username is female or it has a female thing or your voice is mentioned, you're going to have white knights, you're going to have people behaving in a strange way,
Yeah,
because they know that your gender, which it shouldn't. That's not the way
because
it should be.
yeah, I mean, back in my teens, I used to play a lot of online gaming. I have a PS4 instead of an Xbox. But I played a lot of online first-person shooting, especially, and a bit of MMORPGs as well, in fact. And I can definitely understand the trolling behavior is kind of just rampant anyway. But then I suppose I never witnessed it being targeted, especially against females, because I never just, I just, well, for the women that I knew, they just show no interest in online gaming. And for those who did, I thought they were given praise, if anything, but I had no idea there was the opposite was happening until you just mentioned
I
that
mean,
now.
there's different ways, right? One, there's a
Yeah.
sexualization of it and women taking advantage of it. The game
Right.
hot, sexy girl with like a
Yeah.
controller. And then you've got the one that's like really aggressive. That's like, I don't want any other girl in my territory. This is my clan. You don't come in here. Blah 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 blah. And it's like, she's the queen. You can't take her spot. And then the third one, which is more like, hey, we're banding together as women. Let's be friends. Let's work together. Let's do that. And there's all of these micro things online that are very, very strange. And it's a little different, I think, in the VR community, but those things happen in real life as well. Like I've had many a time where women have been aggressive towards me, mostly guys, but I'm
Right.
not going to say way that like women haven't also been really demeaning, and pissed off with me for some reason.
And what you said about people acting differently online compared to in person relates a lot to the conversations I was having with cyber psychologists and the research I was looking into. And there's a specific term they use, which is the online disinhibition effect. Not sure if you've come across it before, but it's literally what you were describing about people when they feel anonymity online, they don't feel responsible for what they say and do. And so their personality is kind of exaggerated, And so they don't feel the consequence. So that explains the trolling behavior, the rants on Facebook, the rage quitting on I don't know, playing Call of Duty and stuff, or maybe the behavior you've been experiencing of people just lashing out because they don't really care because it's online, doesn't feel real. But quite rightly, as you said, there needs to be that sense of authenticity on both platforms, online and offline, and also a sense of accountability, responsibility. Like, I wonder if you've come across online distribution effect before.
I haven't, but I know it. I think it's a really difficult discussion because I think there's three elements to it. The first one would be it's healthy for rehabilitation. It's healthy for you to step out of your body and be in
Yeah.
another virtual avatar. That's something where VR excels in. And then secondly, I also think that because there is no accountability, you can see all these things like on Reddit and Facebook and like Twitter, people are just raging and they can just rage forever and ever, and it's toxic, and
Right.
there's nobody stopping them. And there's no one's going like, stop. And it just becomes like a troll, and then it goes into a long dark route of just like, I think, toxic personality.
Are these mostly children doing this, or similar
I
age to
think
you,
so.
or
I mean, this is a thing. A lot of a lot of
right?
gamers are not children.
Yeah,
They're older men who can afford, the desktops, the
of course.
monitors, and all of that stuff. And what I found very interesting was when I was interviewing all of the women for my documentary was, as a parent, how do you deal if you're a gamer and you're a parent? Are you looking after their children? Are you looking after your kids? Are you giving them enough attention? Um, and I thought that was interesting when you've got like a couple where both of the parents are hardcore gamers, and that's something that they enjoy to do together.
Right.
What happens when you take that away? Um, but that sort of distance from your online virtual self can also be a healthy thing if, for example, you live in a household, an environment where you can't really be yourself, almost like you're dressing up to
Right.
you can be whoever you want to be. You can be whatever you want to be. You can be as good, as bad, as evil as you really want to be without any real consequences. So there's like two sides of the coin. It can be done in a healthy way, in a
Hmm.
sense that you can really exhibit these emotions and personality traits that you might not really be able to do. I My favorite stories, I think, was a woman who was unable to say goodbye to her grandma, and she recreated her whole household in The Sims. And in The Sims, there's like an option to turn the time on or off. And so she lived
Yeah.
with her grandma, and she was just living every single time when she got home. She would run straight to her computer, play The Sims, and her grandma would be there. And she'd say all these things to her grandma, and then she realized, like, as she got older, you know, um, maybe maybe it's time to let go. And so she turned the time on, and she like spent time with her grandma in the virtual world, but she was able to grieve. She was
Right.
able to deal with emotions that she couldn't in the real world. And that's where I
Yeah.
think like all of this is quite helpful. And one of the talks that I had about virtual reality being a good thing was you can safely go into an environment and not be judged for your
Interesting.
appearance, for your gender, for your sexuality,
Hmm.
for religion. You are you. You are a person, and you are judged by that. You're not judged by anything else. When people start knowing about your gender, your religion, all these other things, judgments start coming in, and they will treat you and behave differently to you based on their, based on pre-existing notions of like, I think this or I think that. So two sides of the coin.
Yeah, it causes a lot of debate because, again, the previous conversations I've had, a lot of people were and very anti this sort of new wave of VR and where gaming becomes way more intrusive and a lot more immersive in the environment where it kind of, because I was having conversations and they were talking about how it doesn't help children or adults to deal with their problems directly, but then, as you said, it gives them an opportunity they wouldn't otherwise have had of actually talking to people from different parts of the world and getting that chance to, be something they want to be. So it's kind of like, where do you find the balance with that, or what's your opinion on that?
So I think this is the first week that I have my taste and smell back. I think I was down with the virus and I've been ill for over a month and a half. And
Okay.
that meant that I've been in self isolation for almost 2 months. And like, I'm an extroverted person. I meet people all the time. I go to conferences, I go to events, I do projects face to face with people. But like now I'm suddenly stuck in a virtual world. But I can have meetings with people spatially
Hmm.
and I can high five people. I can give them a hug. I can see their body language. I can hear their tone of voice. I can actually see them. We're spatially together. And I think that's really, really helpful, especially during the pandemic. People were saying it's too immersive. It's too
Sure.
immersive. When you're reading a book or when you're reading a film, you go into your mind, right?
Yeah.
When you go into a social virtual experience, you know it's not real.
Yeah.
And actually, for children with autism, virtual reality is incredible because there is no micro expressions, there is no eye gaze, there is no eye contact, and children can fully express themselves without feeling judged. So
Sure.
I think, this immersion can be a good or bad thing. Really, it's not like we're forcing virtual reality onto anybody. It's just an option. Augmented reality isn't as invasive. But if we really look at like our phones,
Yeah.
how invasive is social media? How
No,
invasive
definitely.
is Instagram? How invasive is it to continuously be posting things on TikTok and be judged for it? You know?
Uh,
When we're talking about, virtual reality, there are unhealthy ways of dealing with it, just like with social media. Or, it's a tool, it's a format. You just have to learn how to use it properly. And maybe people just need to be educated on what's good and what's bad, the extent to which they feel comfortable with and they don't feel comfortable with it. Virtual reality, I do recommend not to put your children in for long periods of time because it hasn't been, the children's brains haven't developed enough to distinguish the difference between digital objects and real world objects.
sure.
Um, so that do be careful with that. Once you're more of an adult, you're able to make that distinguishment, definitely. And it's very, it's very soothing and healing. I've been in, you've probably seen it on LinkedIn, but I've been in virtual reality memorials and people all around the world are saying goodbye to somebody, and that's real. Like the people crying, that's real. People saying something, that's real. I've been in virtual reality meditation where there's people from all around the world. We're all sitting meditating together, and that's real too. Just because it's in a virtual space doesn't mean that it's not real, and it can be used for good. It just depends on how you use it. So there definitely needs to be an education. This is the same with video games. You don't
Sure.
just buy your grandchild GTA 5. It's like, oh, he has a GTA 5. He likes those video games. Oh, this is the latest game. Let's get it from Game. He's gonna love it. And there's like violence in it. There is no board of people on virtual reality that say like, okay, this game should not be for uh, this particular age. It's everything's just kind of available on Steam and Oculus and Viveport. But
Yeah.
as a parent, if you bring in technology into the household, you have a responsibility to understand what's on the platforms. You have a responsibility to handle what's going on. If you don't feel safe, just connect the headset to a monitor so you can see what your child is doing. You
Yeah.
know.
No, I totally, a lot of what you said really resonates with me, starting off with the whole, you know, it doesn't matter what aspects of creative expression, whether it's through film or through a book or anything, it's still the relation to that thing is through the mind, like you said, and it's like an opportunity to get a little bit of expose kind of what our wishes are, what kind of fantasies we want to delve into. Like kind of when I watch a movie, I kind of feel I relate to the characters, and the same with virtual reality. It's just another way to immerse ourselves into that environment. And but quite right as you said, we need to do it responsibly and consciously. And I think that's where a lot of people are trying to put some restrictions on it, or at least have this kind of conversation to understand, okay, how does it affect our brain chemistry? How does it affect and is it healthy for people who are minors, for instance? And so, yeah, no, it's an interesting
It's about
topic.
education. Everything's
Yeah,
about education and understanding what you're dealing with. Otherwise, you don't deal with it. If you're worried about it, then learn about it. Learn more about why it's good, why it's bad, what's good and what's not good. But it's helped people deal with phobias. It's helped people deal with post-traumatic stress disorder, people with anxiety, people with speech impediments, people who are dyslexic, people with psychosis. Virtual reality has been used for the purpose of being able to come out of your body to heal you. Oxford VR are now looking to roll it out actually with the NHS, and it's being used to treat war veterans, war simulation or training. It's so effective that it's completely going to retrain the way that we train individuals for enterprises. You can see it, that's happening right now during the pandemic. People are buying headsets en masse because they require remote working solutions. And that's great for the environment because it means less traveling. It means less time, doing something that's boring. You won't, there's low retention of understanding what's actually happening. But when you're physically doing something and when you're interacting with it, there's a higher chance of you being able to remember it. And it en masse, like, it allows you to do so much. And working with the prisons, I've seen with my own eyes, my own ears, like the benefits of using virtual reality, especially for mental health during like times of isolation.
sure. I mean, going back to what you said about, it's kind of if the parents are concerned that their children are using virtual reality applications, they should be more vigilant about it. They should be more responsible. But I suppose, given that generation gap, they do kind of tend to be quite overwhelmed with the changes. And I suppose to put it all on them, I suppose it's quite. Do you think it's quite a lot to take for a parent already trying to, because are they expected to be a cybersecurity expert and kind of protect everything? Or, I mean, what's your view on that? Is it too much pressure to just land it on them? Should the companies themselves really be taking the lead on this first before trying, dishing it to the parents?
This is a very ethical, difficult question to answer. No,
Yeah,
the company should not be responsible for it because we've seen with Cambridge Analytica that the companies managing their own data, they don't care. They'll just go through it with it. I think I think there needs to exist like an online UN for digital policies and safeguarding
sure.
for online, and they make the rules required for content and platforms to deal with it. There's a lot of companies, that deal with machine learning, where you can see that they're developing new algorithms, the internet is getting faster, the chips are getting faster, but policy is 5 to 7 years behind. The
Okay.
government would never be able to deal with the speed of this technology. It's going so rapidly, it's going so fast. You can see it with the pandemic where where governments are trying to digitize things, trying to do things online, and they're struggling because it's not their forte. It's not what they do. Maybe like South Korea or like China, where it's the system's a little bit different, or Estonia. But otherwise, it's governments work quite slowly. And so right now, because there is no governing system, if you are a parent, and it's not your fault. It's their technology is moving so fast. Things are going really, really quickly. You might not really understand what cookies are. You might not understand how data collection works. But,
Sure.
these are things that I really think you should look into. And if you did, you would be terrified of what companies are doing with your information, and you would not be okay with it. And then, this is one of the biggest problems that I'm having with using hardware that's owned by Facebook. Because, Facebook, the way that they use data, I think is unethical,
Yeah.
and how can I guarantee the safety of a room? Like I was sleeping in my bed, and then in the middle of the night I woke up and I heard, what is that? My Oculus Quest just turned on in the middle of the night. But what's it doing? Why has it turned on in the middle of the night? Has it just taken tons of photos and I didn't know and it's sending it back to Facebook on a server?
Sounds a
I
bit
don't
scary.
know. These are things that people should really, really look into. And a lot of developers are, kind of freaked out by this. And I know that there's, definitely with hardware competition, like with Facebook or with Vive, like people who are going to use a product that they think is easier, better. And at the moment, that's Oculus. But what are the ethical consequences of using uh, an Oculus headset over a Vive? Some of them have to do with data potentially, perhaps. As a parent, there are resources out there online. Like I would be happy to give parents like a full one-on-one. What is VR? What is AR? What is MR? I do this for my job. I explain what these technologies are and what you can do with them. Um,
Oh,
I'm sure there's tons of people out there that are really confused, and there are resources out there where you can go on YouTube, you can go on blog posts, and you can see what they are, but it's tough. And that's the reason why I run XRDI, because you need that hands-on knowledge. You need to grasp it with your own hands to like really understand what is a 360 camera? How does it work? Does it film here? Does it film there? How do you stitch it together? How do you create a story? What's a VR headset? How do you create a VR experience? And like a lot of people, you can go to talks, you can see all these people talking about it. Until you physically have it in your hand, it's really difficult. And for you, as a salesperson of virtual reality, to try and explain to another person, I've created this incredible experience. You're going to be, eating ice creams with polar bears first, and then you're going to like slide down this slide. And you're going to do, and people are just like, what are you talking about? Like, it doesn't make any sense to them. And it
yeah,
won't make any sense to them until you give the experience to them in a headset. And then they're
sure.
like, oh, okay. Like my parents don't understand what I'm doing. I gave them a go. I put them into an experience, and they're like, like they don't really have. They think I work in dreamland, and that
Right.
kind of is what I work in. And this is a world of dreams. It's not. They will never take over real dreams, but it's a form of a dream.
Interesting. No, because the reason for my initial question was based on what I was seeing other cyber psychologists doing in terms of activist work to try and push policies for child safety locks online and kind of because especially for younger people, if you bring the curiosity of a child online or in a virtual environment where as we know with the online world, they become a walking target for all sorts of things to happen, in terms of online predators instance. And there's a concern for parents that as we develop in terms of technology, there's just more and more ways people can be targeted and more ways to be hacked. For instance, and like you said, when you're going to sleep and that Oculus Rift is like beeping away, there's always that concern. But like you said as well, it's just we can't really stop, of course, the rise in technology, but um, we just need to keep informed and educated. And I suppose for a parent who's very, very busy and they've got like 5 kids or whatever, or I don't know how many, and they're just trying to juggle many things. I do wonder if it's going to be difficult for them to keep up at the same time. But yeah, it's one of those. I don't expect you to answer that, but no, it's interesting to hear your perspective at least, and it's a good start at least to get this knowledge out there. And we did touch upon the risks in general a lot about virtual reality and extended reality applications. I'm just wondering, um, is there any other risks you haven't mentioned already that you want to in this moment in terms of looking at the future?
Um, when you become an AI digital avatar, which will happen soon, who owns that data? So again, it's related to data. If you become an augmented reality, hologram, mixed reality asset, and you can manipulate that forever, because that's what they're doing with actors in Hollywood, where they're bringing the dead back to life.
Sure.
Who owns that? Have a think about that.
Interesting. And you touched upon how you want to bring virtual reality into prisons. You mentioned already that it's already you are seeing the benefits, and you mentioned that they are for people who do feel isolated. It's giving them a chance to feel that sense of connection. What other ways do you want to influence prisons with virtual reality, and what other benefits do you see with that kind of intervention? in the future?
So I just want to clarify that in prisons you're not allowed to bring in any servers or internet. So I am not sadly connecting the prisoners with families, loved ones, or friends. However, we are using it for well-being, and so we're using as an incentivization for prisoners to show up to their educational workshops. And we've had a pretty good pilot success with an increase of about 14% increase in attendance in educational workshops, which is pretty high. We can't say that virtual reality is the only factor for that. There are other factors involved. I think the most relevant information that I have seen from the study is, prisoners are in isolation. They're not in control of their situation, and they've got it a lot tougher, I'd say. But everybody right now is in a form of prison. We are unable to meet our friends. We have to stay indoors. We can't travel. We are essentially in a prison. With internet, which allows us to still connect with families and friends and other people around the world. So what VR can offer individuals outside of prison in their homes right now, if they have a VR headset, is distraction, a safe place to be. And so we're using it in a sense of like puzzle games, keeping your mind going, space exploration, stories, creativity, but mostly just relaxation. And it's reduced thoughts of self-harm. It's reduced thoughts of suicide. It's reduced violence in the prison, and it's helped calm people down. And so my recommendation for people who are home alone and unable to see their friends and family who have a headset, look at these experiences where you can just be physically somewhere else, because that's what VR allows you to do. The one that's most popular is called VR Real Fishing, and I've used it myself when I was really stressed out. It's just you're sitting on a lake, you got a fishing rod, and the sun is either setting or like it's daylight, and there's birds flying over the sky, there's rainbows, and all you're doing is just sitting and relaxing. And there's Nature Treks VR, and there's guided meditation, and there's all of these other experiences where you can place yourself in the clouds, you can place yourself in a forest, you can place yourself underwater, you can physically be anywhere that you want to be. You can actually download a 360 film of your favorite place in the world, and you can teleport yourself into that space. Or upload your own 360 video into the space and go into it. And that's really helpful for people who, for example, are stuck in hospitals, or people with dementia. And why can this not work for you? There's some real benefits for it. Look at it. One of the things that I'm working on right now is creating a virtual reality museum that uses artwork as a form of therapy. Looking at artwork as a form of therapy. One of the things I did for branded content was look at Tiltbrush and look at building the happy place of a 5-year-old, and I think he was 75-year-old man. And in Tiltbrush, a Tiltbrush artist created their happy place. You can also create your happy place. You can create this beautiful world that makes you feel safe, that you can go to actually feel happy. And actually, there is a VR experience called VR Happy Place, which I also recommend. I recommend these experiences to ease your anxiety, to ease this feeling of grief that we're going through together, of this terrible time.
To kind of summarize what you've said, I mean, you mentioned that it's giving people in prisons, for instance, an outlet for their emotions. It's giving them a distraction. And you mentioned the fact that there's VR Happy Place as well, that it kind of reminds me of compassion-focused therapy, literally, because in that exercise, you're trying to generate a more compassionate self. And using virtual reality it kind of lit a light bulb in my mind that, okay, maybe you could link virtual reality with compassion-focused therapy exercises and try and build and see your compassionate self in real form. That would be interesting. But I'm just trying to think.
Yeah, I'm working a lot on all of these areas with a doctor, and we're looking at the rehabilitation of prisoners, and what can we do to make them feel better and understand their own emotions better, and change the mindset. But really, where VR really excels and where we can help the most is actually training, giving them exercises and jobs that replicate real life scenarios. If it was a job working in a factory, a job fixing cars, a job that virtual reality can recreate, you know,
Okay.
then that's something that we can train them in without them even having to leave the prison. So, you know, it'd be amazing to work with like accreditation companies and, you know, take them to a construction site. They understand different types of materials, learn how to use the heavy equipment, and before they even are released out of prison, they understand how to use everything. And they've been potentially certified, but now it's actually really going through with it. And this is where virtual reality really shines. This is where it could really change the way that you perceive things. It's being used right now to train all of the doctors and nurses dealing with COVID-19. Virtual reality is being used to train all of them. It's being used to train surgeons and doctors dealing with, you know, life or death scenarios. And this is where we can really help the prisoners, where we can change their lives by potentially upscaling them, giving them an opportunity to get jobs that they otherwise would not be able to access.
Interesting. So you're even looking at helping them to get back into work, which is very commendable. And as well as what you mentioned before in terms of helping them in some cases to deal with PTSD and make sure that it's like an outlet that helps them to stop being aggressive towards each other because it's a nice distraction. So that's interesting. So aside from careers, any other avenues, or is that basically the main thing is just training and getting them back into work once they're outside of prison?
Where there's well-being, there's potentially rehabilitation,
Okay.
which would require, I mean, that's quite tricky because none of the prisoners have been screened. We don't know if we're dealing with a prisoner who has PTSD or someone who has psychosis because
Sure.
there's not enough mental health support in prisons. And that is the most dangerous bit. And therefore, it would require potentially years before we can even help them because we need to go through the ethics committee. However, the training is something that actually helps them immediately get a job. You know, these are the three areas that could really help prisoners. One, it's just like you and me, dealing with anxiety, dealing with depression, dealing with and making them more angry or aggressive or putting them in smaller confined spaces, you know, just like you and me, that isn't going to make things better. It might make them more aggressive, actually. It might make them more angry. The rehabilitation part would be understanding your trigger points, figuring out how to change your behavior in certain scenarios. So if, for example, I know this has been used in prisons in America where you put a person in a scenario like at a pub where someone looks at them in a specific way and then they might want to punch them. So it's like,
Okay.
you know, how can we teach you that that is not the right way to behave? So maybe learning soft skills, social skills on how to speak to someone appropriately. And you know, there are a lot of there's a lot of individuals I think in prison who potentially could have been persuaded to do certain actions that they might not have been they weren't fully aware of that they were doing, or people who might need, you know, who need mental health support rather than being punished. They don't fully understand what, you know, what's going on, but they're being punished for it and they did something bad or they get angry. But how can you teach someone how to not be angry? And that's something that potentially with rehabilitation that could change. The training bit is like the most, you know, useful for
Yeah.
the economy overall. But would it be useful to have someone working on a job who's earning money, is able to sustain themselves well enough, but also still might have anger issues? You know,
Sure.
that's up to you. But you know, those are the three areas where I think virtual reality could be really helpful, and we're seeing it having already been very helpful in the well-being section.
That's very interesting. No, I really hope it does work out because it does sound like it can do a lot of good in those specific areas where it's essentially needed for people to have more opportunity to get back into work or get the rehabilitation they need or just get a sense of
Can I also just add for that,
Yep.
it's also like job interviews, you know,
Oh yeah, of course.
learning the skills for a job interview or learning the skills on like how to find a house or how to look for support, or how to ask for support. Like these are like really essential soft skills that you require to like, you know, move on in the world. The whole idea is to upscale, and not just be stuck.
Right. No, that's very interesting. I suppose you could apply it to a lot of life skills, like you mentioned, and soft skills and other things. So, um, no, I really I wish you best luck with that. It sounds very innovative, and I can only imagine, well, once you get through the red tape, I don't know where it would lead at that point, whether you would apply it to other industries after prisons, because I can imagine once it becomes popular, other companies would want to follow suit and maybe would try and find ways to help their graduate scheme and maybe do virtual reality interviews as a normal regular thing or something. But we are seeing that with online interviews already, where given COVID-19, people are having interviews remotely, and that's not an uncommon thing. But no, it gives me a lot of food for thought in general. But yeah, I mean, that kind of wraps up the questions I have for you at this point. But I hope for those who are watching, you found this very insightful and helpful. Um, if you do want to reach out to Nina at some point and learn more about her website and more about what she does, her website is www.xrdi.org, and her LinkedIn, the description will be, the links to it will be in the description of this video. And if you want to see more podcasts from myself, you can check out my website, scitechacademy.com, and also be sure to subscribe on YouTube. But for now, I hope you take care and take it easy. See you later.